Good evening, Planeswalkers. This is the Hoodie Ninja TCG, and welcome to a deck archetype review with my friend Ferris.
Hey, how you doing?
Today we're going to be going over the Archetype Pheonix deck that keeps popping up around the place. For one, this is not going to be a traditional deck tech. It's not going to go over every single card in the list. Most predominantly, it's going to go over the core cards, some of the support cards that go over it, and maybe some sideboard tech that if you have this deck in your own meta, that you may be able to fight it effectively. So first off, let's take a look at some of the main core cards in the deck. Predominantly, we have Archetype Pheonix, which I don't think is something that needs to be explained. But if you would like to, Ferris, explain why you're playing Archetype Pheonix.
Alright, so for the most part, Archetype Pheonix allows us to show up in metas because of just the amount of freedom it gives us. We get to have access to more cards in our deck because we get to run cantrips that allow us to play this card for free. Not only that, this card actually has the great solution, not the correct word, what's the term? Option of being able to block where cards previously like Bloodghast and Concertar here, black creature.
Bloodshed Champion, something like that. It'll show up on screen right now.
Yeah, but like when we're against like a Carnage Tyrant deck or other things like that, we get to actually trade with their creatures and then bring it back again for another attack.
Yeah, because traditionally Phoenixes can't really block well. They either can block, but their resurrection condition is so extreme that it doesn't really work as well, or they just straight up couldn't block. Like, they were either attacking or they just didn't have the ability to block in the first place. Now, Archetype Pheonix alone doesn't make the deck work. Some of the backup it has is Crackling Drake, which is a X4, where X is the number of spells that you control in both exile and in your graveyard. But more importantly, it has a card draw staple to it, so it replaces itself.
Yeah, this card's really fine. Running it with the card in our deck, Maximize Velocity, allows us to really like get in there against a lot of decks that like to tap out on their end step, like Jeskai Control. Crackling Drake is usually what we play first in most of the matchups, so we can bait out removal, so that our Archetype Pheonix doesn't get hit by it.
Yeah. And that's the two biggest threats in the deck. Some people would say the third threat, either the Enigma Drake or the Electromancer, tends to be the third core card, but you tend to disagree. You think the Radical Idea is actually more core to the deck than either of those cards. Can you explain why?
So, Radical Idea allows us to play way more efficient than most of the other decks in the format right now, where we have like Golgari, like they have to like rely on this explore mechanic, which is only ever sorcery speed. We get to not only get to play at instant speed during their end step, but we get to use this card in Jumpstart to allow us to pitch an Archetype Pheonix or pitch a card. Like in for example, in my list I have a lot of 1-ofs that are good in certain matchups, but not in all. Like for example, Fiery Cannonade.
Yeah.
Radical Idea lets me move that card out of the way so I can get to better cards if I'm playing against like Control.
And with the same thing like lands, lava coils against bigger threat decks, like when they stop becoming effective. Shocks if you're not like going for a burn plan,
right? Fighting
more life gain. So we're moving on to the more supporty cards, and this deck kind of you talked about one previously, Maximize Velocity, gives the drakes that you have haste.
Yeah.
How big is that in your build specifically?
I think I've been playing it as a 1-of until now, and I think I'd like to move up to a 2-of. The card is just... It's so powerful in that it is a red mana for just a red. You get to play it twice. If you have an Archetype Pheonix in your yard or in play, you can use it to just be 2 of the spells you need to cast for the turn to bring back more Archetype Pheonixes. Not only that, the amount of like times that I've had the +1/+1 become like something that I needed to have to finish off the game has been more times than I'd like to remember.
So what else would you consider support cards? Like, we've talked about some of the crucial cards. Like, I know Tormenting Voice is a big one to filter through some of your cards, let you ditch the Archetype Phoenixes. Chartercourse is another big one where you don't necessarily need to cast it before combat. I mean, after combat. It lets you discard some of these worst cards that are in the matchup. Sometimes it lets you discard jumpstart cards, like the Maximized Velocity, but mainly it's in there to discard Archetype Phoenixes. Get a bunch of them in the yard.
Chart Course, for the most part, is we use it as a blitz spell, and where we get to like draw cards into like pitching an Archetype Phoenix or a worst card in certain matchups. But it turns out in a lot of matchups, like where we're already like ahead, even if we have an Archetype Phoenix in the yard, if we have something in play and we can attack for free, I feel like Chart Coursing second main is correct most of the time, so we could just have access to more cards than our opponent.
Gotcha. So next we're going to move on to a couple of different builds of the deck. For example, right now you have the 4 Goblin Electromancer build. The other couple of options that are there are the 4 Enigma Drakes and the 2-2 split. So let's start by talking about your current build and why you play it over the other 2.
So I prefer the Goblin Electromancer, like 4 of in this build, because it just allows us to turn on all of our spells into like cheap costs, so we could blitz out the Archetype Phoenix in the fastest amount of turns, which
Turning
is to
a
do it on
into
turn
a
3.
Ponder is pretty sweet.
Yeah, being able to discovery into a Charter Course into like any of the other like 1-mana spells on our turn 3 allows us to put the most amount of damage into play of all the decks in Standard right now, besides the Nut Draw for Mono Red.
Yeah.
Also, for the times it matters, having the Goblin Electromancer to attack with against a deck that's trying to hold up Justice Strike for your Arclight Phoenixes or your Crackling Drakes, it is an efficient threat that allows us to get there.
Alright, so what do you think about the 4 of the Drake build? I know one of the biggest issues you have with the deck is that it has to run less efficient cantrips.
Right, so in the Enigma Drake decks we've seen, they have to run less Charter Course and almost 0 Discovery, and I think they run still the same amount, 2 Tormenting Voice. I understand why it allows them to still cast their Arc-like Phoenixes from their yard for free, but like Warlord Tree seems so mediocre, and so does the other red 1-drop. Sure, they can't. Yeah, the Crash Through. They get to cantrip, but these cards gives us like card selection, where those cards are just giving us the top of our deck, and that seems way too random at the moment.
Yeah. So one of the builds that is currently like circulating around online, I know for a fact John Fecal is one of the ones building this version, the 2-2 split, 2 Electromancers, 2 Drakes. What do you think about that build?
So I haven't come around to test it yet, but I believe that might be the correct version. We do have to cut down on our one-of like threats in Fiery Cannonade or Beacon Bolt.
Yeah.
But the ability to have the extra Drakes for against the control matchup it seems super important when it does come up.
All right, now one thing I want to do before we move on to the sideboard is you're running a couple of black sources in order to actually cast Dispersal. Do you feel like that's right? Have you ever cast Dispersal? Has it felt good when you cast it?
When I've cast Dispersal, it's to make them pick up a Carnage Tyrant or a Teferi. In the Teferi matchup, it wasn't as good as I thought it was going to be. They had like numerous cards to pitch already because they already were upticking. The Carnage Tyrant version, it felt good, but I knew for a fact that like it wasn't the best play I could make. Like if it had been another like card or something,
you're probably better off just discovering and then putting an Arclight Phoenix in the yard.
Right, or just moving cards out of the way.
Yeah. So the next is the sideboard. There's a lot of different options that I see people running. Why don't you just go over some options that you've been going over? Because I know we don't want to go over like a very specific sideboard because everybody's meta is different. So what are some options that you have going out, and for what decks do you put them in for?
So a couple of the most important cards I think you'll see in most of the decks are 2 Ionize, 2 Disdainful Stroke, and 2 Firemind's Research. These cards are almost always brought in against the control matchups. They extend our game. They get to counter their Settle the Wreckages or Vraska's Contempts that target our Archetype Phoenixes. Super important cards. Another card that gets brought in against control decks a lot would be the Izzet Pheonix. It just extends our matchup much longer. Another card that I was recommended to try was Banefire recently.
Talking about the Banefire, every time I've seen you brought that in, it just kind of underperforms.
Yeah, I have not been about it. It's
by the time you get to the mana that you could burn out, say, Jeskai control or just a generic blue-white control, you're already at the point where 6 damage is not going to kill you.
Right. The problem is that Banefire itself is bad because we're not doing a lot of incremental damage over the course of the game. That's why Banefire is really good in like mono red is you get to play Viashita, Pyromancer, Chain Whirler, all these like 1-drops that like you could just sacrifice to do 1 damage. It's just a lot of incremental damage,
with, like, 5 damage,
and the Banefire will get there. However, I think a new card that I'll be trying tonight, Inescapable Blaze, fits the same slot as Banefire, but for 1 more damage, and it gets to be at instant speed, so I get to do it at their end step.
And you get to hold up a bunch of cards, like, if they don't do something where you need to, like, deal 6 damage to anything, because I think that's something Inescapable Blaze people don't think of. They think, oh, it's 6 damage to face. No, it is 6 damage to any target. It can deal with anything that doesn't say I'm a Carnage Tyrant.
Yeah,
but
it's very useful when we like. I'm not sure if the opponent makes a mistake with their Vraska Relic Seeker and they choose to neg 3, we get to kill it with the Inescapable Blaze. But I don't think we can kill it if they uptick. Another card that's super important to get rid of is Vivian Reed. Teferi is obviously just like a card that we would want to shoot down as soon as possible in any matchup. These are most of the cards we would bring in against like aggro, or not aggro, control.
More control decks.
What we do bring in against aggro, however, like mono red, we do bring in 2 Fiery Cannonade, we bring in 2 Lava Coil, and I believe we bring in the Dive Down. And we cut Electromancers in this matchup. So we cut Electromancers because they already have so much removal that like we'll deal with the 2-drop, and we're going to trade poorly into most of their creatures.
And bringing in those Cannonades, they kind of become they're more damaging.
Cannonade is actually not that bad in this list because Archetype Phoenix, sure, it gets killed by it, but it's another instant sorcery for the 3 cost. Dive Down is really important for holding up our Crackling Drakes in the face of Lava Coils. And Lava Coil is just a great magic card.
So,
a couple other toolkit cards that we could bring in are Blink of an Eyes. It's not very prevalent in our meta right now, but it's very good against the mono-white decks that like to play the History of Benalia and the Benelish Marshal when we get to like get in there for combat tricks. Also, Spell Pierce is another card that is considered in a lot of decks because when your opponent's trying to go really efficient on their spells, Spell Pierce will really get them there because they
attacking one of the bunch of Archetype Phoenixes. They go, all right, settle the wreckage, exile all your Phoenixes. You can't get them back. You go Spell Pierce. If it's like turn 5, you basically blow them out super hard.
Yeah.
Now, one of the most exciting cards that I have not seen in any other lists that is only in your list is a 1-of Nexus of Fate. Why?
So, Nexus of Fate is the oh shit button for the Jeskai control matchup. The version that runs Teferi as the win con. So, what happens in this matchup is that Teferi is going to ult if we do not pressure him. And it's happened a few times where we haven't been able to pressure him. What happens then is that they exile our lands. That's how that works in the Teferi matchup.
Yeah.
What will end up happening is we'll have a 7-card grip.
Yeah.
We'll draw up to 8. We'll ditch a Nexus of Fate. Eventually, it'll be our 7 cards, 0 cards in the deck, and then we draw, and we'll have a Nexus of Fate. We'll ditch it. It goes back in the deck. We can never lose now because the Jeskai control deck does not run target player draw card effects. They only will keep tucking their Teferi, and if they don't resolve a threat like the Izzet or a Murmuring Mystic or anything like that, they will lose the game, or rather, it will go into a draw because the judge declares that the game will not change.
So the Nexus of Fate is less in there for the actual take an extra turn effect and more for the shuffling it in.
Yeah.
And never going away.
However, don't get me wrong, what has happened a good few times now after like trying it out is you get that extra turn spell when the Jeskai deck never expects it. like they tap out to like expansion explosion, right? They tap out to explosion them so they can draw 7 cards and they'll deal 7 damage. But what we'll do is we'll slam a Nexus of Fate in response to take an extra turn because they're doing it at our end step now. We'll take the extra turn. We'll cast 3 spells because we have radical ideas and stuff like that from our yard, and we'll get to win the game from this one extra turn.
The Jeskai control player is just like, all right, slam Teferi, do a thing, and you've got some Archetype Phoenixes. Then you just slam Nexus of Fate. They look at their hand, they look at you, they look at the field, they offer the handshake. Because, like, you just obliterate them, send them directly to the Shadow Realm.
Yeah, Nexus of Fate has, like, worked out way more than I expected it to work out, and has, like, won me many a game.
So, one thing I want to talk about, because a lot of deck techs I see, they don't really go into how to fight these decks. They just say, this deck is sweet, hard stop. But we've played a couple games where some certain cards are just, like, crucial to just destroying your deck in some way or the other. So, I want to go start with the most color-intensive one.
Yeah, Niv Mizzet?
Yeah, Niv Mizzet, and then we're going to go to some other ones. So, why does Niv Mizzet, of all the cards, destroy your deck?
So, the problem with our deck is that we are trying to cheat on a mana cost. We're trying to cheat this Archetype Phoenix into play. The problem with that is it has to be instant sorceries, and Niv Mizzet gets to draw free cards because we're trying to, like, get this creature to play that doesn't even match well into the Niv Mizzet. We have to try to, like, get out a Crackling Drake to try to, like, answer the Niv Mizzet.
And even then, that to fuel your own Crackling Drake, you have to feed into the Niv Mizzet, which then in turn
draws cards,
pings
us, or our creatures.
And getting out the Crackling Drake and, like, fueling it up and maybe having it take some damage assumes they don't have anything. Like, they don't have a Chemisters Insight. They don't have an Expansion Explosion.
Right. After, like, losing pretty hard to Niv Mizzet last week, I forgot to say this in the sideboard because I don't have it in front of me. A card that I'm thinking needs to be brought in against that specific deck that runs Niv Mizzet's main board would be Ral Zarek, the new Planeswalker.
Rad Zebra.
Right. He has the joy of not being an instant sorcery, and has a beacon bolt attached to his neck 3 that usually allows us to kill the Niv Mizzet without them drawing any cards.
The only problem with that is these Niv Mizzet decks. If you're fighting it in the Dragons list, it's not really that big of a deal. Like, the Dragons, they don't really have the backup for it, but, like, the more Jeskai control, Izzet control, that kind of deal. They
run multiple of them, yeah.
Yeah, they have the backups. They could just, like, counterspell the Ral, and then you're kind of bummed.
A neat thing about the Inescapable Blaze that we'll be putting in tonight is that it gets to kill the Niv Mizzet.
Just hard stop. Sure, they get the damage, they get to ping off something, maybe, but it's just dead. They can't counter. Another one we want to talk about is the one that, from our testing, is the Crawl Harpooner.
Yeah, Crawl Harpooner feels pretty bad against this deck. It gets to eat Archetype Phoenixes, and the worst part, it gets to plummet our Crackling Drakes. And that is usually all of our, like, power most times on the board. And green gets to just put so much more power into play off of the turns where we stumble.
Like, to the viewers, I've been playing mono green this rotation, and Ferris has been playing this Phoenix deck. Crawl Harpooner has just overperformed every time because while the Archetype Phoenix is really good and insane, your 3-drops and 4-drops just kind of destroy it. So the Crackling Drake is predominantly the threat. So slamming a Crawl Harpooner for 1 undergrowth destroys them. Like, they have to deal with your Llanowar Elves and other mana producers if you run them, and responding to that with a Crawl Harpooner just kind of destroys it. And having a 2-mana 3/2 just is effective on turn 2 and helps block the various cards. So there is another sideboard card, but it looks like the battery is running low, so I want to go to the conclusion. And so why should people play this deck?
People that want to play this deck will be people that want to try to out-tempo your opponents and take advantage of their stumbling. This deck is great at doing that. Another thing that this deck gets to do is it sees way more cards than every other deck in the format, except for Jeskai Control. But Jeskai Control sees those cards later than us. We get to see those cards before everyone else. The only other deck that I'd say that sizes up to this deck's card advantage is Mono Blue Tempo, when they get a turn 1 unblockable dude into Curious Obsession. This deck is super sweet. It feels great to bring back cards out of your yard, and the coolest effect is when you get to bring back a Crackling Drake while you've been losing a game for 5 turns, and slamming a Crackling Drake and casting a Maximized Velocity from your yard to kill them in one blow.
Not only that, but it feels very Izzet, very in flavor. Like, casting a bunch of spells, hoping to get there. Like, I've seen when you've just I need to land a Phoenix, because if I don't, I'm going to die, or they're going to live by 1 extra turn. So going Opt, Discovery, Tormenting Voice, digging for these things, and then getting rewarded for it feels very Izzet, and I like that about the deck.
Yeah.
So that is the end of this particular deck tech. If you liked it, don't be afraid to like it. We're gonna be that generic YouTuber. Like, comment, and subscribe. But please do that, because comment lets me know what content you want to see. Liking the video lets me know that, hey, we did a good job with this, and that you want to see more of it. And subscribing so that you can subscribe in the future. And we will see you next time.
And don't forget, if you're in the Monroe or West Monroe area, please come and check out Two-Headed Gaming. It's over on, what's the road?
Cypress Street?
In the, what is this? The Key West Plaza.
That.